It's great to be here. I'm really happy to be here, and I am just sharing my screen momentarily so you can see the presentation. And thank you all for being here. We titled this presentation Changing Lives Through Advocacy, not only because not because we have done so, but because it reflects our goal for this book, which was to call attention to lives and actions of many people who have been doing just that, changing others' lives through the advocacy efforts that they've made over the years. We did this through our book Visions, the Inspirational Journeys of Epilepsy Advocates. What we're planning on covering today is more about why we chose to publish a book about epilepsy advocacy, the inspiration and goals for the book. We'll highlight some of the contributor stories, the book organization, and give you a glimpse into some of the book contributors, a personal glimpse. And then if there are any questions, we'll be happy to answer them. In order to get into talking about why we published a book on epilepsy advocacy, we thought it would be helpful to give some general information about epilepsy for anyone who isn't as aware about it. A seizure is a brief temporary disturbance in the electrical activity of the brain that can affect awareness, behavior, movement, or sensation. How that seizure manifests depends on where in the brain the abnormal electrical activity is occurring. So there are many types of seizures, and not everyone's experience with epilepsy is the same. Epilepsy is characterized as recurring seizures. According to the CDC, 3.4 million people or Americans have epilepsy. 1 in 26 people will develop epilepsy in their lifetime. And epilepsy has historically been underfunded. Dr. Schachter's work has been an inspiration for me. I was particularly inspired by the volume of books Dr. Schachter has done, which have been vessels for people with epilepsy or impacted by epilepsy to share their stories and to help reduce the stigma that has been associated with epilepsy. At the time that I reached out to Dr. Schachter to collaborate on a book, it was around like 2011, 2012, I think. And I was motivated particularly by the Brainstorm series of books. And there is a collage of the Brainstorm series here on the left. And those books highlighted the experiences of people with epilepsy, caretakers, children with epilepsy. There were international stories of epilepsy, women stories, and healthcare providers. And I don't know if there are a couple others as well, I believe. Steve, if I missed anything. But another well-known book that he has published is Visions, Artists Living with Epilepsy, that you see on the right. In the medical and publication realms, Dr. Schachter has done so much for the epilepsy community, and aside of numerous medical publications, these books alone have helped to increase understanding of the human impact of epilepsy. So based on these books and my own experience, I had an idea about doing possibly another book, and about the healthcare journeys of people with epilepsy. I happen to be lucky that my epileptologist has been a colleague of Dr. Schachter's for years. And thinking that my ideas were worth some investigation, he helped make the connection. So as Dr. Schachter and I began collaborating in 2011, trying to figure out the specific direction of the book, I didn't know that the Institute of Medicine, now called the National Academy of Medicine, was putting together this comprehensive report titled Epilepsy Across the Spectrum. So once this report, and it's about a book the size of our book, really, it's huge, came out, It was published in 2012, and it not only gave us inspiration for advocacy being the general theme of this book, it gave us a starting point. We were able to pull approximately 60 potential book contributors' names from this report. So, and then this covered a spectrum of topics related to providing care for epilepsy and quality of life that you see on the left. And those are the topics that are in the report. So on page 443 of Epilepsy Across the Spectrum is a quote, "Among the most persuasive epilepsy advocates and educators are people with epilepsy and their family members who are willing to speak out in order to provide a truer picture of the disorder and its impact." And this preceded a recommendation 13, which is to engage in education and dissemination of advocacy for improved care. So I'm sharing this quote because the advocates who contributed to our book did or are doing just that. And we thought that compiling the evidence, which represents a sample of this work, could not only have the potential to inspire future advocates, but also serve to meet this important recommendation. So our goals of the book are aligned with that report, basically, to increase awareness of epilepsy and how it impacts everybody differently. And we do so by the different topics of stories that we've included in our book. Increase awareness of advocacy that has or is being done and acknowledge the hard work of the advocates, and encourage a new generation of advocates to take the baton and continue or help with these efforts. But most important, we wanted the book to serve as a resource for people who may need the services provided, or perhaps some inspiration to begin their own advocacy efforts. So what you'll see here is just a spreadsheet of us trying to figure out, who our contributors are. But as we compiled the stories we collected from the advocates, there was a lot of documentation. And Cecile Davis, who's here as well, was primarily the key person to manage that documentation, and for which we are so grateful. And as we compiled those stories, it's important to note that many more advocacy efforts have begun. And so we knew that we were only getting a little sample of the advocates who were active. And, I had a lot of people approach us after the book was published, and they're like, "Do you know this person's doing this?"
I think that Linda is frozen there. Stephen,
Okay.
would you like to pick it up for now, and then we'll see what we can do about her audio and video?
Yes, but I'm not in control of the slides. Was she?
Yes.
Okay, that could be a problem.
Here she comes again. I think we have Linda back.
Okay. She did send me a copy of this, so I'll open it up in case this happens again.
Okay.
There we go. Yeah.
Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
I apologize. I do not know why I just had that blip. This hardly ever happens. So let's see, where was I? I was, I think, at contributors, and I was going to show presenter view. And the thing is, I think I'm sharing the wrong screen. Hold on a second. Sorry about that. All right. Everybody see the contributors screen? Yes?
Yep. Good to go.
Okay. All right. So what I think I was saying as I cut out, I'm sorry, is we tried to vary the stories we collected so that we were representing a variety of advocacy efforts, from people who started their own advocacy organizations to grassroots efforts or impacting a smaller group of people, or people who advocated for their loved one with epilepsy in like a really powerful way. So we wanted to be sure that anyone impacted by epilepsy, or any health condition for that matter, could relate to the experience and efforts of the advocates. So to collect the stories, we basically, after checking to see who would participate and confirming who agreed to participate, we sent out a questionnaire of questions that really try to get at the person's experience with epilepsy, their motivation and goals for work done on behalf of people with epilepsy, the nature and impact of their work, thoughts on getting involved, and the impact on others as well as their own lives. So we thought by hitting those points that we could make a large impact on the community as far as encouraging other advocates and really getting a good understanding of what these advocates had accomplished. So what we found when analyzing the data collected from the advocates was that many of the advocates fit in multiple categories. So what we did was we did our best to place each story in the most appropriate section of the book. And our book sections encompass advocacy for education awareness, empowerment, fundraising, health and research, organizational advocacy, as well as rare forms of epilepsy, people who advocated through sports and stuff, and SUDEP, which is sudden unexpected death in epilepsy, and writing and arts. Now, to talk a little bit about the advocates. The first advocate, this is a very timely person here, because this is Cassidy Megan. And she's a young girl from Nova Scotia who has epilepsy. And she is actually the person who started Purple Day for epilepsy awareness. So for anyone who doesn't know, Purple Day every year is March 26th. And Cassidy wanted to increase awareness of epilepsy and help people with epilepsy feel like they belonged. And she reached out to people like her parents at first, and other organizations got behind her, and she started Purple Day across the world. And her advocacy, Cassidy's advocacy, is backed by the Anita Kaufman Foundation, which is another story in our book. And every year on March 26th, Cassidy and her affiliated organizations promote wearing purple for epilepsy awareness. And however, all year, Cassidy, who's now, she's a grown woman, a student, a model, she does outreach on social media and locally in Nova Scotia to support people with epilepsy in their own life endeavors. So she's a remarkable person who had a vision at a very young age of what she could do, or what people together could do for people with epilepsy, and she made it happen, which is really awesome. Now, Steve had just told me before the session started that he was just talking to Tony Coelho. So Steve, do you want to say anything about Tony, or do you want me to start? It's up to you.
Sure, I'm happy to. Tony is shown here in the picture addressing Pope John Paul. How he got to that point, in part, explains why he is such a powerful advocate for people with epilepsy, and even more broadly, people living with any form of disability that impacts their lives. So Tony, as a young man, wanted to become a priest. he enrolled in a Jesuit school. He told the doctor on the entrance examination that a few months earlier he had fallen off his father's farm truck, hit his head, may have been knocked out or not, he wasn't sure. And then since then, periodically would just have these weird feelings that would come over him, found it hard to describe, and once or twice had a convulsion. So the Jesuit school physician said, well, the good news is I think I know what's wrong. What you're experiencing is epilepsy. The bad news is you cannot become a priest, because at that time, and we're probably talking about 60 years ago, Tony is just about to turn 80. At that time, there was a papal law in place that people with epilepsy could not become priests. And that derives from a very ancient stigma that epilepsy in some way is tied into evil spirits. Tony was devastated, as you can imagine. This was going to be his life's work. But after he turned a lemon into lemonade, in the sense that he then went to Congress with the firm belief that he could turn his political position into a pulpit. And relevant to today's discussion, he was the lead author on the Americans with Disabilities Act, which was signed during the first President Bush's administration. And it has since been amended with another act. And he has spent his whole career pushing and pushing for the rights of people with epilepsy and other disabilities to live up to their full potential, particularly in employment. But now he's also involved in making the internet more accessible to people with disabilities, for example, visual or fine motor skill disabilities. And he eventually went to the Vatican to address Pope John Paul, to see if he could in some way facilitate overruling this rule that had been in force for centuries. And it eventually was overturned. And interestingly enough, one of the popes actually had epilepsy as a boy. In fact, if you go to the Vatican, there's a picture of this particular pope. He's I can't remember exactly his name as a pope, but he had epilepsy as a boy. So Tony's quite a remarkable advocate, a role model for so many. He was just on a call with us today with the NIH and a large number of disability groups around COVID-19 testing. And his life is an open book. And his story is so powerful, shows how one person can make a difference. And just a wonderful example of the power of advocacy.
Absolutely. Yeah, you told that so much better than the notes that I had, Steve, honestly. But I didn't know that about the Pope, the one Pope. But
I would also add that he was the victim of such overt stigma in his life. First, from his family. He grew up in the middle of California. I should remember where. It's also the same area where the book, The Spirit Catches You, stems from. When he received the diagnosis of epilepsy, his father hardly ever spoke to him again his entire life, out of shame. And when he was running for Congress, his opponents would point to his epilepsy and tell, like during debates, and would tell people, can you imagine what would happen if Tony was at the White House meeting with the president and had a seizure, and so on and so forth. So such a strong person to overcome all of that, not only for himself, but on behalf of other people. And that's really the theme of this book, is people who not only advocate for themselves or for their children. And two of the folks on tonight's call I know personally are extremely strong advocates for their children, but who have gone above and beyond that to advocate for all people with epilepsy.
Absolutely. And I just want to add this picture that we are showing here. This was the only picture that Tony Coelho gave us, and it was the most meaningful to him because that was when he was advocating for something that meant so much to him. It's something that changed the course of his life. So, I thought that was pretty powerful as well.
One more comment I just learned from Tony today. The ADA is in force in 52 other countries.
Wow. Wow. That is interesting. Amazing. That was one of the really coolest parts about gathering these stories for me was the story. So fundraising. So Allison and John Scheinman have made a huge impact as well. They are parents of twin girls, one of which, Olivia Hope, has epilepsy. For the last 6 years, John has served as the director of data analytics and personalization at the Epilepsy Foundation. However, that all started with a lemonade stand. The Scheinmans and their daughter started a front yard lemonade stand to raise money for epilepsy efforts called Lemonade for Libby. They created that as well as Kids Crew, which was a way to empower kids and encourage communication about epilepsy. And both are now national campaigns managed by the Epilepsy Foundation. Lemonade for Libby has raised over, I think, $700,000 at the time when the story was submitted. So I'm not sure at this point what that number is. And the Kids Crew focusing on empowering kids and everything, both have made a huge impact. They chose to share their family's effort because, or we chose to share their family's effort because their advocacy has had such a huge impact on others as well as them. And they wrote, I'm just going to share some quotes. Libby and the work I do for people, the work we do for people with epilepsy has had a dramatic impact on our lives. We approach life from a different perspective. We have been to dark, depressing lows as well as to bright, glorious highs. We focus on hope instead of fear. We have met many families through our work who share in the belief that we all need to do more. So they go on to describe how each person in the family has had a role over the years in advocacy for epilepsy, which I think is really cool.
Linda, maybe before you go on,
Oops.
watch
Yes.
this space, because Libby's sister, shown here on the left, is an unbelievable young girl, and she's going to be president one day, is my prediction.
Oh, really? That's awesome. So Jim Abrahams. Jim co-wrote a number of comedies in the 80s, including Airplane and what was it? Police Squad, I think was another one. And he found himself fighting for his son's life due to uncontrollable epilepsy, which didn't respond to medication. So after having little success in controlling his son's Charlie seizures, he found success with the ketogenic diet. He then started the Charlie Foundation for ketogenic therapies to help others navigate through this unconventional but very successful dietary treatment for epilepsy. So aside of starting and running the Charlie Foundation, which has helped countless families and people with epilepsy, In the course of his work with the Charlie Foundation, Jim also received many letters from people who had similar experiences with the diet. One in particular really stood out to him. And he writes about this, and I'd like to share this. The most dramatic letter was from a mom, Connie Indermity from Marengo, Illinois. Her 4-year-old son, Tim, had bad epilepsy in 1975. Her family went broke from medical bills. She learned about the diet, but doctors at the time, now this was, a long time ago, would release Tim from her Chicago hospital to travel to Hopkins to try it. So at one point, she actually tried to smuggle him out of the hospital. Eventually, Tim did get to Hopkins, and the ketogenic diet cured his epilepsy. And after reading her letter, he writes, I contacted Connie and produced and directed a movie for ABC called First Do No Harm, based on her story. And if anybody remembers that, it was a movie that starred Meryl Streep. So not only was it another chance to spread the word about the ketogenic diet, but Connie's story and Meryl's performance inspired other parents to take control of their children's medical destinies as well. Over 8 million people watched First Do No Harm, he wrote, in February of 1997. So he shared some pictures, one of Charlie being seizure-free and alert, one of the ketogenic diet studies published up to 2017. So I'm sure that has changed a lot as well. And then this is Charlie here, the tall one on the left. And he is now a teacher who has been seizure-free and has a normal diet and lives a normal life. So it's pretty amazing. So for organizational advocacy, Jessica Beach is a story that we just wanted to touch on. Jessica is a person with epilepsy who is a program and outreach manager at the Epilepsy Foundation of Northwest. So Jessica talks about how what she's accomplished now in her role expanded significantly from her initial goals as an advocate. And in Jessica's story, as many others, you'll see that people didn't intend on playing a strong role as an advocate. They ended up doing that, doing advocacy in order to help them, either themselves or their loved ones, and making it a long-term commitment. So for rare forms of epilepsy, there were a number of stories that we received, but one of which was Lisa and Rob Moss. They have a son with TSC, tuberous sclerosis complex. Aside of their role in the TSC Alliance, they developed a seizure tracker. So you can go to seizuretracker.com website, which provides people with epilepsy a convenient way to track seizures through an app. Steve, do you have anything else you would like to add about the seizure tracker or anything like that?
Well, it addresses one of the problems that both families and doctors have, which is keeping an accurate record of, the numbers of seizures and the types of seizures that someone is having. Right. And so, Rob and Lisa addressed this problem. I think Rob has some kind of computer, tech background. And so they created, a diary, seizure tracker. And there are a couple other ones out there as well, but these are tools that, can help supplement folks' memories, particularly in between visits to, the nurse or the doctor. And can even be tied into electronic medical records and so forth. we hope there will be, that this is an interim step towards even better, more accurate ways of counting seizures. But the other aspect of diaries like this is you can also put in if somebody's having potential side effects from medication, what time of day they're occurring. And so, can give a lot of information, important information to help optimize the treatment somebody gets.
It's very important. As
And
well.
they're also extremely involved in the Tuberous Sclerosis Society, or TSA, Tuberous Sclerosis Alliance.
Yeah, they're great. I've met them and they're a great family. I mean, the kids are all grown up now, though. It's amazing. And I know the daughter is doing a lot of epilepsy related research. So it's interesting to see how epilepsy impacts families and inspires families to do other things to help people, which is really kind of nice. So sports and athletics. When it comes to making an impact in the area of sports and athletics, some of the advocates in this category use their platform as professional athletes or their favorite activity to empower people with epilepsy. By trade, Linda Sudlesky is an entertainment lawyer who is vice president for Sony Pictures. However, Lauren is known to the epilepsy community as Backwards Guy. He tells, and you think like, what, Backwards Guy? He tells the story of raising money for epilepsy by running backwards in honor of a brother who had epilepsy who passed away in his sleep from a seizure at age 7. Lauren never knew his brother. He passed before Lauren was born, but he got involved, I think, from a very young age with his dad in running and biking to raise money for epilepsy. And he decided to take it to another level, running the Boston Marathon backwards in 2018. It was really cool. I mean, he made the news and he was very great at promoting it and raising money for the effort as well. But I want to share something that he wrote in the book. He wrote, "My hope is that all individuals who have epilepsy feel less alone. This is why I believe it is so important for people to talk about epilepsy and rid the disorder of its stigma. The more epilepsy comes out from the darkness and into the light, the easier it will be for those who have epilepsy to cope. I also learned," which I thought this was pretty insightful. He goes, "I also learned that having epilepsy is like going through life backwards in many ways. You can't see what's ahead of you because your seizures can come out of nowhere." And so, and he kind of got this insight from all of this running backwards that he did for and raising money doing that, which I thought was a pretty cool, creative way to raise money for epilepsy through sports.
There are a couple different ways to interpret the phrase "he's running backwards." One is that he's starting at the finish line and he's running towards the starting line. But that's not what's happening. He started with everybody else and he finished with everybody else. It's just that he literally moved backwards the whole way.
He had spotters too, I believe. He had a couple people running with him who were spotting him and, making sure he didn't run into people and stuff because he couldn't look back all the time. But did a lot of training for it. And he's like, he didn't realize the different leg muscles that you used running backwards all the time versus forward. I remember him saying that.
I mean, I couldn't even walk 26 miles.
No, right, me neither. So SUDEP, Julie and Doug Hutchison started the Chelsea Hutchison Foundation in honor of the daughter that they lost to SUDEP, which is sudden unexpected death in epilepsy. There were a number of people in our book who shared a story of SUDEP and the advocacy they did after they lost their loved one. And so after Julie and Doug lost 2 loved ones to epilepsy, both Julie's mother and daughter, the Chelsea Hutchison Foundation has provided service dogs, bed monitors, increased awareness, and these things like service dogs and the bed monitors help alert people to seizures and caretakers to save lives. And they had written in something that was pretty powerful in the book as well. They wrote, epilepsy affects so many, yet it's such an isolating diagnosis. Many people are aware of others who are affected by epilepsy, and it's life-changing for most. Sorry about that. I wish Chelsea and my mother had known about this wonderful community. They both felt as though they were the only ones in the world experiencing seizures. Julie, Doug, and other families who shared their stories in the book shed light on how important it is to keep the lines of communication open about epilepsy and SUDEP. So finally, we have Cynthia Folio, who is a mother of a girl with epilepsy, who has chosen music as her medium for her advocacy. And I know Steve knows Cynthia very well, just like he does Tony. Steve, do you want to share a little of your knowledge of Cynthia?
Sure. So Cynthia is a gifted composer, musical composer, and plays the flute. So she's a flautist, if I'm saying that correctly. She's on faculty at Temple University, I believe, in Philadelphia. And she composes music, like I said, for different musical groups, large orchestras, small orchestras. And she was commissioned, this is probably 15 or more years ago now, commissioned to write a piece of music for a local Philadelphia musical ensemble called Relâche, R-E-L-A-C-H-E, which is a well-known Emmy Award nominated modern music group. In other words, they play modern music, contemporary music, contemporary serious classical music. And her daughter Lydia, shown here on the right, was born with tuberous sclerosis and has had epilepsy her whole life, very severe. And she also was nonverbal, or didn't speak much at all, including about what it felt like for her to have a seizure. So Cynthia, the mother, always, felt that it was, she wished she could communicate with Lydia to help Lydia cope. And she went to a local epilepsy camp, Lydia did, one summer. And one of the camp people gave Cynthia, the mother, one of the Brainstorms books. I think it might have been the first Brainstorms book, Epilepsy in Our Words, to read. And Cynthia was very moved by that and felt like she had more insight into what Lydia was experiencing, because Lydia had convulsions, but she also had episodes where she was clearly conscious but suffering, the symptoms of the seizure. So Cynthia chose to compose a piece of music for this ensemble based on on Cynthia's interpretation of what Lydia goes through during a seizure. And she named it I think, The Spirit Catches You, or When the Spirit Catches You, I forget. And that's paying homage to a book some of you might be familiar with, and maybe you have it at the Athenaeum as well, which is called When the Spirit Catches You and You Fall Down. written by a Pulitzer Prize winning author named Ann Fadiman about a family in Central California where Tony Coelho represented. And that book itself is a long, an amazing book. But so anyways, that was the title of it. And Cynthia called me to tell me this. And it was, one of the most emotional experiences I've had in my career, to think that the book, this book had inspired her to express herself musically. So I took that opportunity to tell Cynthia that, I just put another book together with artwork from people with epilepsy. And you might want to look through that. Linda showed that at the beginning, called Visions. And Cynthia did. And then she turned the music into like a multimedia experience where there's both the music and the artwork shown above that is synchronized to the music, and some of Lydia's verbalizations. Excuse me. And I went to, she invited me to go to the premiere of this piece in Philadelphia. And as music is, you just can't explain it in words, what the experience was like. And I invited Lydia and Cynthia and her husband to come to an American Epilepsy Society meeting in Baltimore, where I was giving a talk that year, and to participate in that presentation. And so I spoke, but then we had this piece played. The whole ensemble came down from Philadelphia, and it was, this presentation ended with this piece of music being played. And it was the only, I've been a member of this organization decades. It was the only time I ever saw a standing ovation at an American Epilepsy Society meeting, and it would just never end. And people came up afterwards and were so moved by this. As a matter of fact, it was recorded. And Linda, when you start talking again, I'll put a link to in the chat if people want to hear this piece of music. You can skip over my presentation, that's okay, and go to the music. And they played again more recently at an American Epilepsy Society meeting. Anyways, it's so profound. And so while Cynthia didn't start an organization, like Cure or Chelsea Foundation, what have you, her creativity has influenced, so many people to look beyond, particularly clinicians, to look beyond the facts of epilepsy, number of seizures, your drug level, this and that, but more to the humanistic and soul-like aspects of living with epilepsy. So really, really quite unbelievable.
It's very powerful, really powerful. And that's why, her story is in the book, because we just thought it was such a unique contribution and powerful contribution, and even how that came about from other people's advocacy and other people's efforts, and being inspired by other people's efforts. Did she get the inspiration herself to do what she did, which was really great. So speaking of impact, aside of our initial goals for the book about increasing awareness of epilepsy and advocacy for epilepsy, what we did find that there were two pleasant surprises of how the book is being used. First is the Epilepsy Foundation New England is using our book to train AmeriCorps interns who are working with the Epilepsy Foundation. And they're actually meeting every Monday, and they invite me to that meeting to discuss a chapter with them and answer any questions or give my thoughts. And it's just very cool to hear people talk about the stories and how they're being impacted by them. And other than that, medical residents, I have told, are being asked to read the book as part of their training, so they can better understand and empower the population that they serve, which I think is really was a nice surprise for me. And we do hope to collect data on the use of the book for training volunteers in epilepsy and epilepsy organizations, and hopefully expand its use for that purpose in their areas. Does anyone have any questions?
First of all, thank you so much. Looking for my video. That's all right. You can hear my voice, I think. Thank you so much. This is not only is it inspirational, but I learned a lot of things along the way. And in fact, the contributors to this book, I think, dispelled a lot of myths about epilepsy. Could you, either of you, address that?
There are so many, like, I don't know, I'm kind of, I don't like to call attention to myths so much because I don't want to give them fuel. But Steve, do you have any in mind that you feel are really highlighted in here? Because there are so many that people talk about.
I'm sorry, Diane, I think I missed the last part of your question.
Yeah, I just, there are misconceptions and myths about epilepsy.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Well, they go back thousands of years. And more recently, Salem itself was the site of the
Witch trials?
Interjection of myths about epilepsy into the judicial system when people who had seizures or other kinds of movement disorders were interpreted as being witches or being inhabited by the devil. And there's a story in the Bible, in the New Testament, of a boy that has epilepsy and is cured by Jesus. And as an indication of how religious figures were called on at that time to be faith healers. Now, an interesting sidelight of that story, if you read it, and it's repeated in 3 different books, Luke, Mark, and Matthew, is that Jesus, after he casts out the evil spirit, which reinforces that concept of evil spirits, he recommends 2 things, one of which is fasting. And fasting is how you start the ketogenic diet. So that's quite interesting.
Yeah.
But
It really is. Yeah.
if those of us who have seen others have seizures, particularly convulsions, there's no doubt it's one of the most frightening things you could ever witness in your life. So it comes with very strong emotions, and it's hard to believe that a short circuit in the brain could do something like that. So people look for other alternative explanations besides that. And one thing Tony did was with his ADA Act, was to say that if a person with epilepsy is capable of doing a job and sufficient accommodations can be made for them at the workplace, they should get, they should work. They should get the job. This is not, people should not be defined by their epilepsy. Patty, who's on the line, the nurse I worked with for a number of years, I don't know how many thousands of times she told people, you may have epilepsy, but epilepsy doesn't have you. And, I would say all the advocates in this book and so many more that we just couldn't, fit in, have proven that by going above and beyond their own, personal situation to show what wonderful humanistic work they can selfishly or selflessly do on behalf of other people who they may never meet, but to make the world a better place so that people, anyone with epilepsy, can live up to their full potential and not be encumbered or burdened by myths and misunderstanding and outright stigma. And it can take very overt forms, like there are parts of Africa where if you have a seizure and you fall into a fire, they may not try to rescue you. And so it's called Burns disease in these communities. And the theory is that if you survive, you must be inhabited by some supernatural force. And if you don't, then you weren't, but you're dead. Now, not all societies have such negative views of epilepsy. The Hmong, H-M-O-N-G group, which had a big footprint in Central California and also in the Minneapolis, St. Paul region of Minnesota, they originally emigrated to the US from Southeast Asia, Cambodia, Laos, and so forth. They're of the opinion that, or they're of the belief that a person with epilepsy has gifted supernatural abilities, to be revered, not to be feared. And some societies, particularly Scandinavian to generalize, have a completely neutral aspect. Epilepsy is just another disease, not just another disease, but should be viewed as a medical condition for which there are diagnostic tests and treatments and so forth. So, I was involved in a 60-minute story a number of years ago with Mike Wallace. It was about a young woman who was working at the CIA in a clerical training role. She was there to train to be a administrative assistant. She was known to have epilepsy. She had a seizure, and during lunch one day, she was told to go to the CIA doctor's office, who required her, before she could come back to work, to require that she wear a helmet. And I'm not talking about like a bike helmet. This was like a helmet you see in art museums that knights in shining armor used to make, with two little slits for the eyes. And also was moved to the basement. And I got involved because the producers wanted to know, is this pretty typical of, is this, good advice? Or this? And I said, no, this is one of the more subtle ways that people with epilepsy are stigmatized in society so much that, they give up, or they, so anyways, it never ends. I've been at this now long time. So is Patty, and so is one of the parents I know well on the line tonight, and so is my assistant Cecile. And unfortunately, I think we've only been able to take baby steps with making progress in, overcoming these concepts, these negative connotations. The way epilepsy is portrayed in movies and so sensationalistic, other than when the Meryl Streep movie, of course. But Michael Crichton, when he was writing for a medical show, ER, I think it was, portrayed seizures totally unrealistically. I wrote, many other people wrote, saying, show it realistically. This is what people need to see and understand. Don't sensationalize it, etc. I could go on and on and on. I know we only have limited time, but Diane, you put your finger on an ongoing, continuing issue.
What, just briefly, what can be done to dispel or to clear up so much of this misinformation? I think that would go such a long way to making strides.
It would have to be a multiple aspect, from multiple perspectives. But one very powerful step that could be taken is for somebody of Michael J. Fox's stature to own their epilepsy and work diligently to, dispel myths. So I mentioned his name because he's, of course, affiliated with the Michael J. Fox Foundation. Who was the actress who worked so hard for HIV and AIDS?
There are several, but
yeah, Elizabeth Taylor.
oh, yes. Mhm.
And it's public knowledge, but ironically, she also had seizures from a benign brain tumor, as it turned out. But we need somebody like that. But actors are, or celebrities are reluctant because they feel that they will be ostracized, even in Hollywood, where you think it would be liberal and accepting. We know a lot of very famous people who have epilepsy, and we keep it private because they've chosen to keep it private.
Mhm.
If one of them came forward, that would be a huge step. I don't know, Patty, do you want to amplify on that?
No, Steve, I think you said that well. I think that we need more and more people at all different levels of society to speak out. So the celebrities are so important because they can get immediate coverage, but just the day-to-day person with epilepsy, parent, grandmother, if they can talk about it and tell people what it really is and what it's not, and not be ashamed by it, that just really goes a long way in all of our communities. So, I agree with everything that you said in this book. I think it amplifies, the important messages so much. But I think I want to thank you and Linda for all that you've done on that.
Thank you, Patty. I think that you say that very well. It takes all different types of advocacy to make a difference, and I think Steve also calls attention to the fact that people who have a lot of attention, that have a level of fame, it's also important. And there are some people who have done that, I think, but it takes all of us, and it took me a while to feel comfortable saying I have epilepsy, and I think it wasn't until I had better seizure control. So sometimes I think people, once they get better seizure control, they're a little more comfortable talking about it because it's not as much of a direct issue in their life, and at least that's from my experience.
Yep.
Well, unless anyone would like to add anything else, I highly recommend the book Visions. It is inspirational, to say the very least. The commitment is really something. These advocates have, they're spending their lives spreading the word, trying to inform people, trying to raise money. And both of you, Dr. Schachter and Linda, you've met them, or you've interviewed them, and so firsthand.
And lest anyone think we're trying to retire on the profits from this book, I want to assure everyone that we're donating our book royalties for epilepsy research.
Yeah.
Which is
Wonderful.
wonderful. That is great. Well, I also want to thank the audience for joining us. We had a nice cozy group, and I think it was certainly a worthwhile program. And again, the book is just wonderful if you can get your hands on it. Buy it. In fact, oh, good. Carolyn has just put the link up there so that you can buy it quickly with that link. Great. And it's at the Salem Athenaeum as well. So be sure to check SalemAthenaeum.net for a calendar of our upcoming events. We always have something going on at the Athenaeum, including something that's coming up in June called Reading Frederick Douglass Together. It's a special community reading, a program that will be held at Salem's Tabernacle Church on June 12th. And we invite all of you to join us then. So happy spring, everyone. And again, thanks to our guests and to our audience, and have a good night.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.